Welcome to Unit 4. In Unit 4, we're going to look at all the options available to you for reporting on big and large data sets, things that will make your life a lot easier if you work with a lot of data. So first of all, we're going to start with what we call a pivot table. Now, a pivot table turns raw data, like you see in front of you, into a workable report and information. At the moment, it's just raw data. It's not really telling me anything. Just some rules in terms of pivots. Every column needs to have a heading. If one of the headings were missing, you would get an error. So let me just show you. So for example, if I took this data and I said insert pivot table, you're going to get this type of error which says the field name is not valid. What that means is every heading forms the field name of your report. So if one of your headings were missing, you would have a problem. Also be careful, watch for people like to put these little blank columns in the middle of nowhere. Again, this would also be a problem because there's no heading on this column. So let's remove it. Also, don't put totals into your pivot tables because pivot tables does the total for you. So you'd end up having a total on a total. So let's have a look at how we start a pivot table. Let's click on Insert, Pivot Table. As you can see, it's self-selecting the data from A1 to row 1085. I always say if the pivot table is going to grow, perhaps it would be a good idea to highlight from A to O rather, because what would happen then is if you added records at the bottom, you could very easily update your report. It then asks where you want the pivot report to be placed, and I'm going to say in a new worksheet at this stage. So let's click on OK. What you're going to see down your right-hand side is all your field names, or your names or your headings from your database. And over here at the bottom of the page is where you're going to design your actual report. So you normally always start with a report with what am I calculating, what am I summing, what am I averaging, what am I counting, etc. And that's going to move into your values area. So that's generally where you should start when you design a report. In my case, I'm going to look at the total annual package. So I'm going to drag my annual package into the values area. As you can see at the moment, it's counting it. How do I change the function? It could be sum, it could be average. I'm just going to click on it, and there's an option that says value field settings, and I'm going to sum the annual package instead of counting it. You then need to ask yourself, what do you want to look at the pivot table by? By the business unit, by the cost center, it could be any number of things. In this particular case, I'm going to look at it by department, and perhaps by their race. Before we do that though, let me put job title into column. As you can see, it's very, very wide. This is not something I would put into column. Let me show you the difference if I move job title into row. You can see then it's reading row instead of column. So we never put long fields in column. We put the shorter fields in column and the longer fields in row. To get rid of job title, I can just drag and drop outside to get rid of it. So let's start with our department and our columns at the top. You can see that we have a blank now. That's because we selected on the column heading and there's a whole lot of blank cells in there now. It's relatively simple to turn this off. As you can see, each label here has a filter. So if I click on the little filter there, I can just switch blank off, and I no longer have the blank option in my report. So here we're looking at the total annual package by their department and by their race. Let's add gender in. You would normally find that you stack things in row rather than column. So in other words, that would have the race first, then male, female, because it's put in that order, race first, then gender. Let's put it under department. As you can see, then you'll have your department and male, female as well. And to me, that's a much easier way of looking at things. Unfortunately, with the later versions of Excel, this particular view is not always the easiest to read because it puts everything into a single column and just indents it. So I would go into the design ribbon, change your report layout to show in tabular form. And what you find then is the gender sits in a separate column now, and it's a lot easier to read. Also, to make it a bit more readable, you'd probably want to highlight your totals and shade them. You have a number of totals here. I don't want to select them one by one, so I'm going to go onto any, don't go on the actual row number, that takes the whole row. Any of the totals, doesn't matter which one, on the first letter you'll see a little black arrow. If you click, it selects all the totals. Let's go to our home ribbon, bold and shade, and it will shade them all at one time. So you can see it's a lot easier to read now. What I'd also do is highlight all my numbers and comma and format them so the numbers are a little bit easier to read. And there, you know, if you had this report data in your database and you try to do a report with it by filtering, sorting, copying and pasting, it would take you all day. This has taken a couple of minutes. So whatever you want to add or average or count goes into values, and then whatever you want to look at that by goes either into row or column. Row being the longer fields and column being the shorter fields. Hence the name pivot table, because it allows you to pivot the tables around. It is also very important what you put first in row. At the moment, my split is by department and then male, female. If I had to put gender in front of department, my primary split would be gender. So it all depends on what you actually want to look at it by. And so that is a basic pivot table, what the values, columns and rows fields are, and how you can highlight all your totals at once. And remember to go into the design ribbon and change your report layout to tabular. I normally do this before I even begin. So we're going to, in further lessons, explore pivot tables even further.